What is poverty? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. What is poverty? The standard definition is a lack of material resources to live at a certain level. And we know that poverty means to be extremely poor, to not be able to meet the basics in the society that you're living in. One other definition is the renunciation of material well-being in order to join a religious order. So when monks join the monastery and they do a vow of poverty, they renounce the material world, basically to make it easier to get into the spiritual realm. They just go, okay, we're going to not worry about the material world, and they enter into a state of poverty. So up front, I think it's important to note that there's nothing moral or immoral about poverty, about a person being in a state of poverty. It's not a judgment on that person. People can be in a state of poverty and be great people, and people can be in a state of poverty and be bad people. It has nothing to do with their material level. And people can also enter into poverty through, even though they're giving a lot of effort in their society or their situation, they can still end up in poverty. And yeah, a lot of people can not try and end up in poverty. And in the case of the monastic path, it can just be a decision to renounce the material world and say that I'm going to concentrate on spiritual matters and the material world's just getting in the way. Which is something that people who stay in a state of poverty for a long time, many people inadvertently find themselves in the spiritual realm and actually enjoy it. That's actually the story for a good number of not just people in poverty, but homeless people and street people. There's a decent percentage of people who find enlightenment on the street because they were inadvertently relieved of the burden of the material world and trying to make sure that their economic level was at an acceptable level. And by finding ease in the flow of being out of the material world after the trauma of becoming a homeless or a street person, a decent percentage of them found enlightenment in the spiritual realm, sort of inadvertently. Now, so I think it's good to understand that poverty is not a moral assessment in any way. It's simply an assessment of someone where they're at in terms of the economic line of what we would call basic standard of living. So having food, shelter, and a few other basics will keep you right above the poverty line. So if you have a place to live, and then it gets debatable. It's very subjective. Where the poverty line is very subjective. But usually food and shelter and education and access to medicine is usually, if you have those things, you're above the poverty line. And if you have those consistently and you have those projectably into the future, then you have a stable level above the poverty line. And if you drop below that, then you're in poverty. Right? And there are many consequences to being above or below the poverty line. Being below the poverty line can create situations, degradation in the individual very quickly. They can affect a person's hygiene, which is usually the first thing that accelerates degeneration or degradation of a person, which also leads to dehumanization. So when people drop below the poverty line and it begins to accelerate the degradation of them as a person, it makes them susceptible to all sorts of misfortunes, I suppose would be the best way to put it. addictions, exploitations, basically most of the normal protections that a person living above the poverty line takes for granted. These people, when you fall below the poverty line, it puts you in a position where you sort of become prey, become economic prey in a way. And that's one of the reasons why it's such a loathsome state to allow in a society, which is sort of the other aspect of this is we know that when a person is living under the poverty line, it makes everything difficult. It makes it difficult for them, hygiene, finances, medicine, education, but ultimately it makes it nearly impossible for them to positively contribute to society. And in addition to that, it makes it so that they can't even be part of a good foundation for a society. The poverty line, whatever percentage of a society drops below the poverty line, if you look at the poverty line as the foundation of the house of society, and this is the foundation, is the poverty line, whatever percentage of people in the population are below the poverty line, if this is in this house metaphor of this being the foundation, whatever percentage of them are below the poverty line, that's what's putting holes in the foundation of society. It's ruining the foundation of society. It's because the poverty line is a completely arbitrary, man-made, artificial economic line that exists, and it's 100% controllable by the government. Doesn't matter what system you're running, doesn't matter where in the world you are, doesn't matter what form of government. The government is 100% capable of controlling where the poverty line is and what percentage of their population is above or beneath it. And it's their moral responsibility. It's the moral responsibility of the government to ensure that the foundation of society is as solid as it can possibly be. And they know that this metric is controllable at the government level, and they know all of the effects of what the poverty line and the percentage of people living under it means. The studies have been done, the sociologists know, the sociologists and the economists, they know exactly how dangerous having a certain percentage of people under the poverty line is. And they also know the cynical calculations they can make by keeping a certain amount of the population in that class and make them a prey class. The cynical political calculations, the cynical economic calculations, and all of the cynical leveraging they can do by keeping a certain percentage of the population under the poverty line. They 100% know it, and they teach it, and it's not a secret. And it is the government, and by the government, it's not just the elected officials' moral responsibility to keep people above the poverty line. It's the establishment's moral responsibility, which means all of the wealthy people in a society, it is their moral responsibility to at least keep in their consciousness the fact that they need to keep the elected officials and the government up to date on their moral responsibility to control the percentage of people out of poverty. And the goal should be 0%. Philosophically, we're looking at an artificial economic system completely and arbitrarily invented by man. And they'll try to ascribe all sorts of organic things. And for sure, trade is an organic thing. But the modern economy of every single country on the planet right now is arbitrary and filled with all sorts of imagined and artificial economic laws and like acceptable levels for this and that. And it is their moral responsibility to program into their arbitrary economic models 0% poverty. It's an unacceptable condition for an individual to exist in a society, and it's completely controlled by the governments. 100%. So when an individual doesn't have the material resources necessary to participate in society in a healthy manner, to keep themselves from being degraded and being dehumanized, they don't really have many options. And as I was saying earlier, intellectuals from the wealthy classes and other classes, but I say wealthy because they have the moral responsibility to manage all of this. They've known for generations exactly what opportunities people in the poverty classes are limited to. And they have used that information essentially to not fix the problem, but to predate them. Which, of course, is beyond, it's obviously immoral. And, you know, the corollaries of that are far reaching and the implications are important and impactful. And the sad part is that everyone kind of knows what's going on with it, and it's a controllable situation. Now, philosophically, we've identified that individuals that are in a state of poverty, it's no moral assessment of them, but observationally, we know that when we've assessed them to be in poverty, what we're really saying is that they're in a position where they don't have the material resources to live a healthy human life in the society that they're in. It's the admission of society that people within their society are not materially qualified to be in the society. And there are all sorts of calculations that can be made from that. But I think philosophically, the important assessment to make here is to assess that since the society and the economic model is arbitrary, and since society ideally only exists to serve and enhance the quality of life of the individual, the fact that poverty exists in any percentage in any society on the planet is a moral failure of the leadership of societies, because it's completely manageable. And the stakes for the individual being in poverty are so abhorrent that, I mean, it couldn't be more night and day the fact that there's moral responsibility on the side of people that have abundance of resources. And that's not a political call to, you know, make them do anything or say that people shouldn't be wealthy. It's a philosophical assessment to say that people who have wealth need to take it on as a responsibility. It's not a call to strip anybody of any wealth. It's a call to say that if you're in that position, it's your moral duty to be aware of it and to act in accordance with such. Even if that means that instead of picking up the phone to make your lobbyist make you richer, you pick up the phone to make a lobbyist make your city have less poor people, which can be done. Really not that difficult. Just ingrained patterns of thought have made people perceive that it's difficult through the inertia of thought and tradition and orthodoxy, which of course always has to be updated from time to time. I mean, we even update our phone software from time to time. So anyhow, poverty, it is the lack of material resources to engage properly in society and to live a healthy life. And there is a moral responsibility within the leadership of society to manage that level because it is arbitrary. So, well, I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner, and I hope you have fun.